Absolutely, Chairman. I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain Traoré and Burkina Faso, as they know that both, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the.
According to many sources, Burkina Faso just shocked the world. President Ibrahim Traoré has rejected a gold and oil deal reportedly backed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Streets erupted in celebration, while Washington fumed and hinted at serious consequences. Why would Traoré risk so much to say no? What exactly was in that deal? And could this be the start of Africa's boldest shift in decades? Let's find out. For years, Africa's natural resources have been the center of quiet, calculated negotiations, most of them sealed behind closed doors, away from public scrutiny. But on this day, everything changed. Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, didn't just reject an offer from one of the most powerful countries on earth. He made that rejection loud, public, and impossible to ignore. According to regional sources and diplomatic insiders, the proposal reportedly carried the weight of U.S. President Donald Trump's backing, promising investments tied directly to gold and oil access. Yet Traoré didn't blink. In a public statement delivered in Ouagadougou, he declared, "Burkina Faso's resources are for its people, not for foreign exploitation." The reaction was instant. Crowds poured into the streets, waving flags and chanting in support of Traoré's decision. For many Burkinabé, this was more than a policy stance. It was a moment of national pride, a symbolic reclaiming of control over wealth long seen as exploited by outsiders. Across Africa, social media erupted under the hashtag #WalkWithTraoré, turning the local decision into a continental rallying cry for resource sovereignty. In Washington, the response was far from celebratory. Trump, known for his blunt and aggressive style, reportedly issued an ultimatum, warning of serious consequences if Burkina Faso failed to reverse course. Rumors of sanctions, withdrawal of aid, and even restrictions on financial transactions began circulating in US and European media outlets. American commentators called the rejection a geopolitical miscalculation, while African commentators labeled it the first sign of true independence in decades. What made this moment so explosive was timing. Burkina Faso is no stranger to foreign interest in its resources. For decades, international companies, most of them Western, have dominated gold mining operations, often exporting raw materials and leaving behind little for local development. But under Traoré's leadership, the tide began to shift. His government had already nationalized several key mines and announced the creation of a state-owned gold refinery, moves signaling an economic strategy that favored self-reliance over dependency. Rejecting Trump's proposal was, therefore, not just about one deal. It was about protecting an entirely new economic direction for the country. It sent an unmistakable message. Burkina Faso was no longer interested in playing by old rules, where powerful foreign governments shaped Africa's resource policies in exchange for short-term incentives. The shockwaves extended beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Neighboring Sahel countries, Mali and Niger, quickly expressed solidarity, framing Traoré's decision as part of a growing regional shift away from Western economic and military dependency. Across West Africa, commentators began openly speculating whether this could trigger a domino effect, inspiring other nations to review or even cancel existing deals with foreign powers. Meanwhile, in Europe and North America, economic analysts sounded alarms about the precedent being set. If more African nations followed Burkina Faso's lead, billions of dollars in future resource revenue for foreign companies could be at risk. That fear alone made Traoré's rejection far more than a local event. It became a global flashpoint, raising urgent questions about Africa's economic future and its evolving place in international politics. For now, the standoff is clear: a small West African nation standing its ground against one of the world's largest economies. But how did it come to this? What was actually in Trump's gold and oil proposal that pushed Traoré to take such a bold stand, knowing it could trigger retaliation? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community. where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. According to the sources, the details of the proposal rejected by President Ibrahim Traoré remain shrouded in secrecy. But enough has emerged to sketch a picture of its scale and why it stirred controversy long before it even reached the Burkina Faso presidency. Sources familiar with preliminary drafts describe it as an extensive package granting U.S.-aligned corporations priority rights in Burkina Faso's gold mining and newly discovered oil fields. In exchange, Washington was said to be offering infrastructure investments, security partnerships, and access to technology for resource extraction. On paper, it looked tempting. The deal allegedly promised new roads, modernized mining equipment, and an injection of American capital into an economy still recovering from years of instability. But a closer look revealed what critics called a familiar pattern: resource for influence agreements that primarily benefit external actors. Gold extracted under such arrangements often leaves the host country in raw form, with minimal local processing and negligible job creation. Oil exploration would have followed a similar model, with production rights reportedly set to favor American companies for decades. Observers noted that this was not an isolated initiative. Since returning to office in 2025, Trump had made securing critical resources abroad a key focus, arguing that America needed reliable partners for its energy and mineral needs. Africa, with its vast reserves of gold, oil, cobalt, and other strategic materials, became a top priority. The Burkina Faso deal was reportedly part of a wider U.S. strategy to lock in access to critical minerals before China and other emerging powers could dominate the market. However, Burkina Faso under Traoré was already pursuing a radically different economic vision, one focused on sovereignty and domestic value addition. His administration's goal was to stop exporting raw gold and instead build domestic refining capacity, ensuring that profits stayed within the country. Allowing foreign companies to reassert dominance over gold mining and new oil fields would have reversed years of work towards self-reliance. Adding to the controversy was the deal's security component. Leaks suggested that the U.S. offered enhanced military support and intelligence sharing programs, supposedly to help stabilize the Sahel region. But to Traoré and many in Burkina Faso's leadership, such provisions raised red flags. The country had already witnessed how foreign military partnerships in the Sahel sometimes led to political interference or long-term dependency, as seen in neighboring Mali and Niger. Accepting these security terms might have opened the door to more direct U.S. influence over internal affairs. There were also political optics at play. Accepting the proposal would have been seen by Traoré's domestic supporters as a betrayal of his revolutionary rhetoric, which centered on reclaiming African resources from foreign control. His leadership has built its legitimacy on promises to use resource wealth for national development rather than foreign profit. The Trump-backed deal, no matter how lucrative, clashed fundamentally with that vision. The potential length of the agreement raised further concern. Analysts reviewing leaked components said some contracts could have locked Burkina Faso into commitments lasting 20 to 30 years. That meant future governments might have been legally bound to honor arrangements made under external pressure today, a political risk no sovereignty-minded leader would take lightly. When news of the proposal became public knowledge, it fueled debates not only within Burkina Faso, but across Africa. Some leaders privately admitted they would have signed such a deal without hesitation just a few years ago. Yet Traoré's outright rejection highlighted a shift in African political thinking, where resource control is increasingly viewed as a matter of national security and dignity, not just economics. This raises the inevitable question: how did Traoré respond beyond simply rejecting the proposal? His rejection was not symbolic alone. It was paired with decisive policies to secure national control over resources, reshape the mining industry, and send a signal across the continent. Rejecting a deal backed by the President of the United States was more than just a diplomatic statement. It was a commitment to a different future. For President Ibrahim Traoré, simply saying no to Trump's gold and oil proposal wasn't enough. His government followed the rejection with a series of domestic reforms aimed at proving that Burkina Faso could manage its wealth and set its terms for development. One of the most immediate responses was an acceleration of nationalization policies that had already begun under Traoré's leadership. Several foreign-run gold mines, long symbols of external control over Burkina Faso's natural wealth, were transferred into state ownership. These weren't token gestures. They were high-value, high-output mines that generated significant revenue for foreign corporations. By bringing them under public control, the administration sought to ensure that profits would circulate within the national economy rather than flow abroad. But nationalization alone wasn't enough. Traoré emphasized a complete shift in how natural resources were used. Instead of exporting raw gold, a practice that leaves most of the value chain overseas, Burkina Faso began investing in local refining and processing facilities. The crown jewel of this effort was the development of a state-owned gold refinery capable of handling large-scale refining operations. By processing gold domestically, Burkina Faso could export finished products rather than raw ore, retaining a much larger share of profits and creating new skilled jobs. Oil exploration, though still in its early stages, received similar treatment. Traoré's administration announced that exploration rights would be granted primarily to state-backed ventures and African partners, reducing reliance on Western oil giants. In parallel, new legislation was introduced to ensure that any foreign company operating in Burkina Faso would be required to invest directly in community development projects, infrastructure, and local employment, terms far stricter than those historically included in foreign contracts. The government also shifted its approach to financing. Instead of seeking Western loans tied to resource concessions, Burkina Faso began exploring partnerships with regional banks, sovereign wealth funds from allied countries, and even public-private partnerships with domestic investors. This financial independence was meant to give the country more bargaining power and avoid the debt traps that have historically undermined African sovereignty. Public support for these moves was overwhelming. Citizens who had long watched their nation's wealth flow out of the country now saw tangible efforts to keep it at home. Farmers, miners, and small business owners hailed Traoré's policies as a turning point, believing that local control over gold and oil would translate into real improvements in schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. This resource-focused economic independence was paired with a cultural message of pride and ownership. Government campaigns emphasized the idea that Burkina Faso's resources were the inheritance of its people, not the property of outsiders. This message resonated strongly with younger generations, many of whom saw Traoré's defiance as proof that Africa's destiny did not have to be dictated from abroad. The rejection of Trump's proposal was, therefore, not just an act of resistance, but the beginning of a national economic experiment, one built on value addition, regional solidarity, and a deliberate break from the dependency models of the past. Still, such a bold move was bound to spark international reactions. As Burkina Faso tightened control over its resources and rejected Western dominance, the question emerged: how would Africa as a whole respond to this precedent, and what would the global backlash look like? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The moment President Ibrahim Traoré publicly rejected the US-backed gold and oil proposal, the ripples spread far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Within hours, Africa's political landscape shifted. For decades, resource deals with Western powers had been treated as inevitable. Few leaders openly challenged them, and even fewer succeeded in changing the terms. Traoré's defiance challenged that assumption, triggering an immediate wave of reactions across Africa and in global power centers. Across West Africa, leaders and citizens alike viewed Traoré's decision as a symbolic turning point. Mali and Niger, already distancing themselves from Western military and economic influence, expressed explicit support for Burkina Faso's stance. Statements from both governments praised Traoré's uncompromising commitment to sovereignty and framed his rejection as an act of Pan-African unity. Guinea's transitional leadership went further, hinting at plans to reassess some of its foreign mining agreements. But it wasn't just political elites responding. On social media, hashtags like #WalkWithTraoré and #Africa for Africans trended for days, generating millions of impressions. Young Africans, many of whom had grown up witnessing foreign companies dominate resource industries, saw Traoré as a leader willing to fight for economic self-determination. Activist groups in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa organized solidarity rallies, turning what began as a Burkina Faso decision into a continental movement for resource sovereignty. Economic analysts across the continent began reassessing how African nations negotiate with foreign powers. If one of the poorest countries in the world could reject a lucrative US-backed offer and hold its ground, what might stronger economies do if they adopted similar strategies? For many, it was the beginning of a debate on whether Africa could finally pivot from raw resource exports toward domestic value addition and regional trade networks. In Washington, the rejection landed like a diplomatic bombshell. President Trump, known for his hardline transactional diplomacy, reportedly called Traoré's decision a mistake that will hurt Burkina Faso more than anyone else. While no immediate sanctions were announced, senior U.S. officials hinted at reviewing aid packages and trade preferences, suggesting that Burkina Faso's defiance could carry financial consequences. European governments also reacted with unease. France, which has historically maintained deep economic and military ties with its former colonies, saw Traoré's move as part of a broader pattern of declining Western influence in the Sahel. Analysts in Paris and Brussels warned that other African nations might adopt similar positions, jeopardizing billions in long-term resource contracts and investments. Global financial markets took notice too. Shares of multinational mining companies with existing or planned operations in Burkina Faso dipped slightly as investors digested the potential for similar policy shifts elsewhere. Meanwhile, China and Russia, both increasingly active in Africa, responded with cautious interest. Though neither government issued formal statements endorsing Traoré's rejection, state-affiliated media in both countries portrayed it as an example of the global South breaking free from Western economic control. Reactions among global commentators were sharply polarized. Western business media framed the decision as short-sighted and risky, arguing that rejecting U.S. investment could slow Burkina Faso's economic growth. African and Global South voices countered that such arguments ignored decades of exploitative arrangements and undervalued the importance of sovereignty and local development. This growing divide revealed something larger. Traoré's rejection had become more than a national decision. It was now a symbol in an ongoing struggle between two worldviews. One favors globalized, Western-led economic integration based on established corporate structures. The other prioritizes local ownership, value addition, and independence from foreign influence. With support at home and growing solidarity across Africa, Traoré had sparked something bigger than Burkina Faso itself. Yet global powers were unlikely to accept this shift quietly. Would the world's most powerful economies attempt to punish Burkina Faso into submission? Or would this mark the beginning of Africa rewriting its place in the global order? The rejection of Trump's gold and oil proposal by President Ibrahim Traoré has already been framed as one of the defining political moments of the decade. But its true impact lies not only in Burkina Faso's present circumstances, but in the broader shift it represents for Africa's future. This was not a temporary clash of two leaders. It was a signal that Africa may be entering a new era where sovereignty over natural resources is no longer negotiable. For decades, Africa's story in global economics has often been written by others. Colonial-era resource extraction systems evolved into modern corporate agreements that still left African nations as raw material suppliers for foreign economies. Despite independence, many African countries remained locked into contracts favoring foreign companies, with wealth leaving the continent faster than it could be developed locally. Traoré's move directly challenges this historical narrative, suggesting that Africa can and perhaps must create its economic models. In this model, African countries would no longer simply export gold, oil, or rare earth minerals in raw form. Instead, they would invest in domestic refining, local processing, and value-added industries that create jobs and generate wealth internally. Burkina Faso's plan to build a state-owned gold refinery and develop domestic oil capacity is one example, but the broader idea resonates far beyond its borders. Leaders and policymakers in other African states are now openly discussing how to replicate elements of Traoré's approach without triggering economic retaliation from powerful foreign actors. One of the most striking consequences of Traoré's decision is the growing sense of solidarity among African nations. Regional blocs like ECOWAS, often divided by competing interests, are being forced to confront a critical question. Should Africa negotiate with global powers as individual states or as a united front with shared priorities? The Pan-African response to Traoré's rejection suggests momentum for the latter. Activists and political leaders have begun advocating for a continental resource strategy, one where African states coordinate extraction policies, share refining infrastructure, and collectively bargain with external partners. If realized, this approach could prevent resource-rich nations from being played against one another and ensure that more of the continent's wealth is retained within Africa itself. The global reaction has also opened opportunities for Africa to rethink its partnerships. While the US and parts of Europe expressed alarm, other global players, particularly emerging economies in Asia and the Middle East, have shown interest in new kinds of resource agreements based on equal exchange rather than extraction. This opens the door for Africa to diversify its economic relationships, potentially reducing dependence on any single foreign power and giving African states greater leverage in global negotiations. Yet, this path is not without risks. The history of global economics shows that powerful nations rarely accept losing influence quietly. There is a strong possibility that Burkina Faso, and any country following its example, could face punitive measures like sanctions, trade restrictions, or diplomatic isolation. The ability of Africa's new leadership generation to navigate such challenges will determine whether this moment becomes a lasting shift or a temporary spark. Traoré's decision has already captured the imagination of a generation that has grown tired of seeing Africa portrayed as a dependent actor on the world stage. For young Africans, his rejection of a deal backed by one of the most powerful countries in the world is proof that their continent can stand on its terms. The question now is whether this spirit can survive the inevitable backlash and translate into long-term policy changes across Africa. Will other leaders follow Traoré's lead? Will Africa finally control the fate of its resources? Let us know in the comments section. Can this new path survive in a world still dominated by global powers unwilling to give up influence easily? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.